Today it seems wherever you turn, wherever you go, there's yet another organization being compromised. I find it amazing that on the news, in magazines, on newspapers, the hot topic that everyone is talking about and discussing is cyber attacks, and more cyber attacks. However, the good news is there's lots of visibility and focus on security right now. The problem that I have is everyone is just talking about how bad everything is, but no one's ever talking about the solutions. How do we build a more secure world? How do we go in and properly defend and secure our organization? The good news is it's not that hard. The bad news is we have to change how we think about security. We have to do a paradigm shift and look at the problem differently. So what I'm going to do this evening is I'm going to start off by dissecting down how the attack works. Because the problem with security is we have to make sure we're fixing the vulnerabilities that have the real threats. If we don't understand how the threat operates, then we're not going to be able to build the right defensive solutions. And many of the concepts is going to build on Alan Powell's talk from last night. One of the big drivers that I'm going to latch onto is the concept of offense must inform the defense. Offense must drive how security operates. Here's why. Security has and will always be about risk. If we work in security, we are in the risk management business. One of the best pieces of advice I can give you tonight is if you want to verify and validate whether you're fixing the right problems, before you spend $1 of your budget or an hour of your time on anything in the name of security, ask yourself 3 questions. What is the risk? Is it the highest priority risk? And is it the most cost-effective way of reducing the risk? That will guide you to make sure you're focusing in on the correct areas. Now, what is risk? Risk is probability for loss. Risk is really broken down into 2 areas, threats and vulnerabilities. Threats is the potential for harm. That's what is the offense capable of doing. Vulnerabilities are weaknesses that allow the threat to manifest itself and cause harm. Now, question, if I have a high-risk item, that means there is a high likelihood threat with a vulnerability that has a big impact. Question, which one of those do I control? If I want to go in and reduce my risk, because they're multiplied together, I only have to reduce one of them. I only have to reduce the threat or the vulnerability. I don't have to reduce both. Which one do we control? The vulnerability. We don't control threats. We don't control hurricanes. We don't control the Chinese. We don't control the Russians. The threats are what they are. The only thing we control are the vulnerabilities, whether our systems are patched, locked down, or secure. Now, here's where the problem comes in. Because vulnerabilities are what we control, and vulnerabilities are how we reduce risk, what is the natural inclination? To just go in and start fixing random vulnerabilities. I've heard clients go in and say, let's fix the low-hanging fruit. Let's just go in and show positive movement and security and fix the easiest things. Or I've had clients go in and say, let's fix 5 vulnerabilities a week, because that's going to keep the adversary out. What's the problem with that? I don't want you fixing random vulnerabilities. I only want you fixing vulnerabilities in which there's a real threat. If there's no threat, then it's a benign vulnerability, and you're really wasting your time and energy. But Eric, isn't it better to just start fixing any vulnerabilities? Isn't fixing some vulnerabilities making positive movement? No, and here's why. Vulnerabilities are infinite. If the number of vulnerabilities was finite and never changed, then yes, any vulnerability you fixed would reduce the attack surface, and eventually you'd get to no vulnerabilities and be secure. There is no such thing as a vulnerable-free environment. Vulnerabilities will always be around us. Therefore, I would rather you fix 5 vulnerabilities in which there's a real threat than 500 vulnerabilities in which there's no threat. So threat drives the risk calculation, and what's another word for threat? The offense. So the offense drives our risk calculation. I only want you to fix vulnerabilities in which there's a real offensive risk. If there's not an offensive method for breaking in or compromising an organization, then the vulnerability is benign and who cares about it? So one of the drivers tonight is we need to understand how that offensive threat works so we can understand what vulnerabilities they're exploiting so we can fix the problems that really matter. Because people today are spending a lot of time, spending a lot of energy and effort fixing random vulnerabilities, but those are not the problems that really matter. So that's the first driver we want to make sure we focus in on, is making sure we only fix vulnerabilities in which there's a real threat of likelihood and impact to our organization. And ultimately, what is our goal? Our goal is to make sure, no pun intended, that you don't become a target. We want to make sure that we minimize or reduce that overall impact. Now, the other important thing as we go through tonight is we have to make sure that we always differentiate when we talk about resources between monetary resources and human resources. Because there's a significant difference between buying more stuff and headcount. One of the problems with many organizations is when there's a breach, when there's a compromise, what is the initial response? Here's a check. That's why many security people have made the claim. The best thing that has ever happened to us is we've had a breach. Why? Because after a breach, the executives start putting zeros on that check and start giving you money. What's the problem? Giving you more money can actually make the problem worse. Here's why. Why do many companies get compromised and broken into? Because they don't have enough people to manage, configure, and monitor the security equipment they have. And most of our clients, they have a bunch of equipment, firewalls, IDSs, IPSs, SIM solutions. One of the fallacies, a SIM solution doesn't magically find adversaries. I always go in and get upset customers. I just bought SIM solution X, I put it on my network and it's not doing anything. Like, well, did you tell it to do anything? Well, no, it's supposed to magically go in and find everything. I'm like, wow, that's cool. Can I have some of that pixie dust? Right? Things don't magically work. A SIM solution only does what you tell it to do. So if you do not have enough people to go in and configure the equipment, that's why things are failing. So now watch what happens. You don't have enough people to monitor and configure the equipment you have. So that's why your systems failed and you got broken into. So now what do you think happens is, if you spend $5 million more and buy more stuff, what have you done? You now have more things for those same people to handle, and what you've really done is now take your limited resources that are not focused enough and spread them even thinner. So you've actually created a worse problem, not a better problem. So in some cases, if you just spend money without increasing headcount, you can actually be contributing to the problem set, not fixing it. So we need to make sure that we have the right people in the right places to fix that issue. So now let's go in and let's start dissecting down the threats we're up against. The big threat that we're up against, hopefully you don't mind, I've been teaching all day. You saw me pretty in the jacket, we'll get that off and get comfortable, is what we call APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats. Now, I want to go in and give a couple of caveats here. When I'm talking about advanced persistent threats, advanced adversaries in this presentation, I am focusing on what I call the 95%. 95% of advanced threats operate in this manner that I'm going to describe. Now there's a 5% of what I sort of call EPTs, which are elite persistent threats, which are super high-end, even more customized, that can bypass, get around, and completely different than even traditional methods of attack. So there's always that anomaly out there. I always like being careful, because I sometimes have students going, Eric, you keep going in and saying all, and not every advanced threat works that way. Absolutely. So I'm referring, when I say all, or I refer to threats tonight, I'm referring to that 95% of advanced threats that are working, breaking in, and compromising adversaries. I'm not necessarily focusing on that 5% elite. I'll specify and talk about them, but I just want to recognize that there's always unique, different attacks. Not everything fits perfectly in that category. When we talk about advanced threats, the first thing we have to recognize, they are going after a different target. They are not targeting traditional operating systems like regular threats did. When we look at our traditional worms and viruses, they went after operating systems like Microsoft, Mac, Linux, and Unix. Now, you can say what you want about those vendors, but if you put in enough time, energy, and effort, you can actually lock down and secure those operating systems. Hardening, configuring, locking down, and securing a Windows system, Unix, is not rocket science if you understand how the OSs work and you put in enough time, energy, and effort. So over the years, we have made those fairly difficult targets for the adversary. So they have moved on to a new operating system. This new operating system is very hard to configure, very hard to manage, and almost impossible to patch. And that operating system is not made by Microsoft, it's not made by Apple. That operating system is the human operating system. This is what advanced threats are going after. They are targeting the human to trick and manipulate them into doing something they normally want to do if they knew the true intent of their actions. And I'll tell you, this is very hard to configure, very hard to secure, and I will tell you based on first-hand experience, human resources frowns upon you when you try to patch people's brains. I have tried on many occasions, and they get very, very upset with me. So that is what it's going after. Now, to set the stage, there are some advanced attacks which I'm going to cover in 3 of my case studies. But some of these advanced threats are not terribly difficult. They're just well-focused and well-targeted. Let me give you an example of one of my favorite, just so you can understand the type of threat we're dealing with. There was a CEO of a Fortune 100 company that was being targeted by an adversary as an entry point into the company. Based on all of the info we can find, he was being targeted for 11 months. They knew everything about him. They had a full dossier about every possible way he operates. They knew where he grew up. They knew where he went to school. They knew how he met his wife. They knew where they got married. They knew everything about the kids, his family, you name it. They had everything about him, and they were waiting for an opportunity to strike. Last May, they had their opportunity. Last May, there was an accident at his son's high school. Now, the foreign adversary had nothing to do with the accident. They didn't cause the accident. But within 30 minutes of the accident being all over the news, he receives an email from the superintendent of the school district. And the email reads this: "Dear concerned parent, as you know, there was an accident at Eagle Ridge High School. Our utmost and primary concern is the safety of your children. We are doing everything possible to return back to a normal operating state. While we understand your heightened concern, we are in a lockdown state, so please do not come down to the high school. Attached is emergency contact details where you can find additional information. We appreciate your continued support. Sincerely, the superintendent of the school district." The email was perfectly written, no grammatical errors, no mistakes. When he opened the attachment, it was on school letterhead. It had all the right information. It had the contacts for the superintendent, the principal, the fire department, and the hospital. Everything was correct, everything was accurate, everything looked perfect. He assumed it was from the superintendent and didn't think anything of it. 5 months later, one of his admins was noticing unusual traffic leaving the organization. They called my company to do incident response. We showed up, we found his computer as the root cause, and that email as the point of compromise. When we went back and told him, "Sir, this email wasn't from the superintendent. It was from a foreign adversary. You were targeted, and your system was broken into and set up as a pivot point. He goes, no, no, Eric, that was a legitimate email. I said, no, no, it wasn't. We had to trace back the MX records, open it up in the sandbox, and show him the malware and how it operated. And he looks at me and says, what type of adversary are we dealing with? That's the advanced threat. That's the adversary you're up against. Now, please don't get me wrong. I am a big fan of awareness. A lot of people throw awareness as the solution. That doesn't work here. All the awareness in the world would not have stopped him from opening that attachment when there was an accident at SANS High School. I'll prove it. If there is any group of people that is aware and understand the threats that are out there, it is people who will come out at 7:30 on a Tuesday after being in class all day long. It's you. I would argue that this group of people in the room are more aware than almost anyone else out there of the cyber threat. Now, I want you all to be honest with me. How many of you are parents? How many of you have children? Now, moment of truth. If there was an accident at your child's school and you received that email, how many of you would open the attachment? Exactly. Exactly. You are aware, you understand security, you understand the risks, and you would still open that attachment. That's the advanced adversary. They are so good at recon that the results are almost guaranteed. It wasn't necessarily that high end, but it was guaranteed in the results. So I want to be careful with that A word, advanced. When people hear advanced, they always think crazy, off the wall, bizarro attack vectors. The A in APT is not referring to the advanced nature of the attack. It's referring to the advanced nature of an adversary. If you have an advanced adversary, what are they going to use to target you? The simplest, easiest, most effective method. They're not going to pull out the good stuff unless they need to. A well-targeted email, properly crafted with the right content, is almost guaranteed results. That's an advanced adversary. They're going to use whatever works, whatever's the most efficient method of delivery. So don't think it's going to be these crazy off the wall. It's targeting people with very specialized social engineering. So now let's go in and let's look at our definition of APT. Now, just so we're clear, I have had students when I've given various forms of this presentation that want to argue and debate the definition of APT. I had one student that for 30 minutes wanted to debate it. Let me help you out. I am not going to debate during this presentation. If you want to debate my definition after the presentation is over, that's okay, but I'm going to invite two of my friends along to help out. Two of my friends that I'm going to invite to help with the debate is going to be Johnny and Jose. Now, the good news is, Johnny and Jose, I actually hung out with them last night. They are here, and they are really happy to meet you. So if you want to debate the definition, we can go downstairs and I can introduce you to them. You might know them already. Their formal names are Johnny Walker and Jose Cuervo. Right? If you're going to want to go in and debate the definition, I'm drinking. Now, I always have some students going, but Eric, I don't drink. Okay, let me be clear. If you want to debate the definition after I've been teaching for 12 hours, I'm drinking. You can have water. Right? You don't have to partake. Right? But I'm going to go in and have a little relaxation before we go down there. So if you want to debate it, we can do that later. Now, I tend to take a middle-of-the-road approach to APTs. There's sort of three camps when we get about APTs. First camp are the purists. Where did the term APT come from? APT was developed by the United States Air Force in the early 2001, when the fact that the Chinese were breaking into US military systems was classified. Now, that always cracks me up. Do you realize about 10 years ago, the fact that the Chinese were breaking into systems was classified? That wasn't public information. Today it's sort of like, duh, of course they are. Right? But there was a point in time where it was classified. So the original derivation of the term, APT, was referring to the Chinese breaking into US military systems. So there are some still purists out there that say only the Chinese against US systems is an APT. I think that's way too restrictive. I think that's way too limited and missing out on the picture of what the problem set really is. So that's one school of camp. Now there's another extreme. The other extreme is anything that happens on a computer is an APT. If you sneeze on your keyboard, that's an APT. If there's a virus or a worm, that's an APT. Now I think that's way too loose because there are significant differences between traditional attacks and APTs. So I think that's too loose. So I sort of take a middle of the road. So let's break down this definition. It is an adversary. It's not a piece of code. It's not a worm. It's not an executable that acts in a predictable manner. It is an adversary that can change and adapt on the fly. They have advanced logistical and operational capability. They can alter and modify. Do you realize this is not a worm that they're going to throw out there and go after low-hanging fruit and see how many sites I can break into? They're targeting you. And they are spending months upon months upon months of finding, identifying, and looking for methods of exploitation. Then their goal is not typically data. Their goal is long-term occupation of your network. Many times, APT cases we've worked on, they just wanted to break in and monitor, and eventually, after 9 or 12 months, they start exfiltrating information. But their primary goal is long-term occupation of your network. Then they want to go in and they want to exploit. Notice I didn't say extract. They want to exploit information. They might alter it, they might destroy it, they might steal it. The joke we always say when we're dealing with incidents, but there's a lot of truth to it, if you want to know who's attacking you, look at what type of exploitation they're doing. If they are stealing information, it is usually the Chinese. If they are doing financial-based attacks, it's usually the Russians. And if they're blowing stuff up, it's usually the Iranians. And that's just typically how it breaks down. So the exploit depends on the country and typically the means and methods of operation. Then they want to do it in a covert manner. They don't want to get caught. So to me, the game changers of APTs are traditional threats, are opportunistic, low-hanging fruit, visible. Advanced threats are stealthy, targeted, and data-focused, which means if you are not actively looking for them, you won't find them. I often get comments from our clients, "Oh, Eric, we have not had any attacks or any breaches over the last year." I'm like, okay, really? How did you come up with that data point? Well, we haven't seen anything on our IDSs. We haven't noticed anything unusual. We haven't seen any visible changes to our network. I said, great, so what you're telling me is you haven't seen any attacks that are signature-based, that are visible, that have actively changed anything on your network. You're like, that's what I said. I said, You said you haven't seen any attacks or compromises. Two big different things. I don't want to get anyone upset with me, but I also want to be honest with you. If you have not seen any attacks or compromises on your network for the last 12 months, it's not because they're not happening, it's because you're not looking in the right area. Trust me on this one. The probability that every one of you sitting in this room, that your organization has been compromised or attacked over the last year is pretty darn high. If you're not seeing it, it's not because it's not happening, it's because you're not looking in the right spot. You need to look below the surface. You need to change how we approach security. Here's the problem. Most of your security devices that you have on your network, firewalls, IDSs, IPSs, endpoint security, antivirus. What's the issue with all of those? Basically, at a fundamental level, they're signature-based. They're really looking for set patterns and set signatures. Well, guess what? APTs are always different and unique. They do not have set signatures, and therefore, most of those devices are ineffective at catching those systems. If you look at most of the incidents we work on, do you know what all of the compromised networks have in common? Every one of them is fully compliant with all regulations. They have policies, they have resources, they have budget, they have preventive measures like firewalls and IPS, they have detective measures like IDSs, they have encryption, they have endpoint security, and they're still compromised. Most of those traditional measures are not going to be effective against this threat. We have to change how we approach security. Now, I will give you one of the methods. I know we're still in the beginning, laying out the problem set, but I'm very big on solutions, so I typically can't wait to that point, so I like giving you some solutions throughout. Do you know one of the best ways of stopping and minimizing the impact of advanced threats are? Application whitelisting. Now, just so we're clear, application whitelisting only works if it's 100% turned on. I often get companies going, oh Eric, we've tried application whitelisting, it doesn't work. I'm like, seriously? Like, oh yeah, we do application whitelisting with exceptions. Wait a second. That's like going in and saying, I don't drink and drive, I just have a beer when I'm going to pick up the kids. Wait a second. It's the same thing, right? You can't change terminology. Application whitelisting is where you go in and you have a strict list of every executable that can run, every library, every config file, every module, every DLL that it calls is fully cryptographically hashed. So anything that runs on your system is verifiable from a cryptographic hash perspective. Anything that does not match every single cryptographic hash does not run. Now, question, how are you going to compromise that? For an adversary to break into your system, they have to upload code. They have to run code. They have to change things on your system. If you have a locked down environment where you can only run approved executables, you can't modify DLLs, configs, or anything else, it is really, really difficult for the adversary to cause any harm. Now, application whitelisting is not easy to do, because you have to fully verify your entire environment and know every single executable that's running. But what I want to plant the seed is don't think all or nothing. Many times our clients go in and they go, okay, we have to roll an application whitelisting for 80,000 boxes. Never going to happen. I agree. Don't do that. Go after the high-risk targets. The way we do application whitelisting with our customers is we go in and we treat it as an opt-in program. The way it works is, if you go in and you make bad decisions, and you click on links, and you open attachments, and you get your system infected, you just opted into our program. Then, when we go in and we clean up your box, you now get a system that has application whitelisting installed. So yes, it's a little limited, but guess what? You made mistakes, and we now need to protect you. And you know what's brilliant about that? I will show you data that proves people who got infected once are very highly likely to get infected in the future. Because if you're going to go in and click on that attachment once, you're probably going to do it a lot of times. So do you realize about 90% of all the incidents come from about 15% of the users? So if those 15% of the users will identify themselves early, and we can go in and lock down and protect their systems, we now can go in and make it that much harder for that adversary to break in. So application whitelisting works well. And by the way, this is not me building on one of the threads that Alan Paller did. This is actually advice from the Australians. The Australians, DSD, the Directorate of Signal Directorate, it's basically their DOD. They did a multi-year study where they dissected down many different incidents and said, what are the top 4 things that we can do to protect, secure, and lock down the environment? And the top 4 things they came up with that are the biggest game changers: patching operating systems, patching applications, controlling administrative access, and application whitelisting. And honestly, the first 3 are sort of icing on the cake. The application whitelisting is really the cake. That's the heavy lift, and then those other ones just sort of add on top of it. So they have provable data if you go in and just search on the Australian top 4, or I'll give you my email at the end, I can send you some papers, but they have verifiable data to show this works. So I always like to bring that out, because everything I talk about is not things Eric came up with when he was drunk one night. It's always verifiable data from my research or third-party researchers to go in and show that this stuff actually scales and works in the environment. Okay, Eric, what if I can't do application whitelisting? What if that's not feasible in my environment? Here's the backup solution. What are the 2 most dangerous applications on planet Earth?
Java, Flash, Adobe.
Okay, what is the delivery mechanisms? Web browsers and email clients. Right? That's basically delivery for Java, all those other areas. I was actually teaching this several weeks ago, and I said, what's the most dangerous applications? And the student yells out, Angry Birds! And I'm like, okay, probably right, but besides Angry Birds, right, what are the 2 others? I would say web browsers and email clients. They are the source of most evil. So here's the other solution. What if we go in and we run your web browser and your email client in a separate guest virtual machine? And we do it in a way that it's transparent to the user. So now every time the user starts up the web browser or starts up the email client, everything looks legit, everything looks fine. Little do they know, it's running in a separate, isolated guest operating system. Now, if they go in and open an attachment or click on a link, what gets infected? The guest operating system, not the host. The host stays clean. Then, if and when you shut down your mail browser, excellent, it's definitely late at night, your web browser or email client, hey, that might be a new technology. Your mail browser, I like that, right? So your web browser or email client, now when you shut that down, what goes away? The virtual machine and what goes with it? All the malware. So now what have we done? We've created an environment where, yes, you're getting infected, but in a controlled environment for 30 to 40 minutes, not your primary system. So now we're going in and controlling the amount of damage that can be caused to that adversary. So that's another solution that works well. And by the way, one of the technologies that works well for that on Windows is Baronium. Baronium does a preload, so the user doesn't even realize or have to wait. So Baronium is one of the technologies where it's not just for web browsers or email clients, but that's where we typically focus in on. Now, what's the third option? The third option is we need to get away from this concept of having what we call fat clients. Having a system that has a hard drive, has persistent, has an operating system. What's the issue with this? The issue with this is, how often do you rebuild your operating system? You don't. It's based on your tech refresh. So most companies, every 3 to 5 years, you get a new laptop, which means you reinstall that OS every 3 to 5 years. That means that operating system stays the same for 3 to 5 years. Now, what happens if 6 months into it, you get infected? You're now infected for another 2.5 years. That infection stays for a long period of time. So one of the other solutions is using thin clients. The idea behind a thin client is now we go in and we don't give you a fat client. You don't have a hard drive, you don't have an operating system. Every time you boot up your system, it goes out to the network and it pulls down a clean, verifiable image and runs in memory. Now, at the end of the day, when you shut down your computer, that image goes away, and then tomorrow when you turn on your system, you get a clean image back. Now, if you click on something or get infected, you're now infected for 4 to 5 hours. You're not infected for 4 to 5 years. So now, you're only infected for that day. When you shut the system down, everything goes away, and then when you turn it back on, you get a new clean image. So there are solutions out there, from application whitelisting to running dangerous applications in virtual machines, to thin clients that can start to allow us to be able to deal with and tackle this given threat. Now, some of the different myths about APT, because I tell you, there's so many fallacies out there. One of the first ones that I love, oh, APTs, they only go against governments. We're not government, we don't have to worry about it. Actually, most of the APTs go against commercial organizations. The government is actually a smaller percent. Why? especially in the United States. What do advanced threats go after? Critical infrastructure, banking, energy, water, electricity. Question, in the United States, who owns that? Commercial companies. It's regulated by the government, but it's owned by commercial entities, which means those are commercial companies that are ultimately going to be targeted and someone's going to go after. Small organizations aren't a threat. They're only going after big organizations. Actually, it's usually the opposite. Here's why. Advanced threats are passionate about supply chain exploitation. They're going to go in and they're going to look at the entire supply chain and say, where is the easiest point of exploitation for us to take action? And that's what they're going to go after. We just worked on an advanced threat incident that targeted a 150-person organization that had about $40 million in revenue. And you might say, 120 people, 40 million, why would they go after it? Well, this company went in and they made a chip. All they did was made a specialized chip. That specialized chip was sold to a second company that made computer motherboards. That computer motherboard was sold to a third company that made computers. That third company was sold to a fourth company that made radar systems, and that radar systems was sold to a major government contractor. Now, question, if you want to go in and you want to exploit that radar system, you can go after the major government contractor. This is a $12 billion company. How many people do you think a $12 billion organization has working on security? It's about 5,000. How much money do they spend on security a year? About 120 million. So do you want to go after a company that has 5,000 people with a $120 million budget for security? That's option one. Option two, a 120-person organization. How many people do you think they have dedicated to security? Half a person. And he probably also cleans the floors in the evening, right? He's multitask, right? He is not dedicated to security. How much money do you think a $40 million organization spends on security? $100,000. So now, who do you want to go after? A half a person with $100,000 or 5,000 people with 120 million? I'm going after that one. I'm going after the easy target. So actually, in most cases, it's the smaller, tinier companies that are exploited. Why? It's easier, it's simpler, it's more effective. Supply chain exploitation is the name of the game. Now, if you're an entrepreneur and you're looking for a billion-dollar idea, I will give it to you. Supply chain verification. If you can create software that can automatically verify and validate supply chain for any products, you can make billions. Now, please, 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 don't come up and ask me how to do it. If I knew how to do it, I wouldn't tell you I do it myself. I don't know how to do it. I just know whoever can figure out how to do it, there's a lot of money to be made there. Then, as I talked about, destruction is not really the main goal. Some countries it is. Chinese is really about stealing information. Russians are more about financial gain. Let's also look at it differently. Do you realize how much money and how much the Chinese have invested in the United States? If the United States stock market crashes and our economy goes kaput, the Chinese are in trouble. Do you know how many companies, how many industries, how much investment they have in this country? The Chinese do not want to destroy our country. They do not want to bankrupt our country. They just want to be the primary supplier for our country. They just want to stay one step ahead when it comes to technology. So in some aspect, they want and need us to be healthy. They just want to supply all the technology and be one step ahead. So we always got to remember, what is the goal of that adversary that we're up against? So let's look at a few cases. Let's look at some case studies that I've worked on over the years. And this sort of gives you an idea and a flavor of some of the ways the adversary works. I also want to remind you, in every one of these cases, it is individuals that are targeted. It is not the company, it is not service, it is the individual. So we had a situation where we had a bunch of executives that were traveling overseas to attend a conference. They brought laptops, so there were 10 laptops brought with them. These laptops were fully verified and built by the security team. They had endpoint security, they had full HIPs, they had full encryption, they had full authentication. Anything you would want to put on it, they had. When these executives went to dinner meetings, they locked them in the hotel safes so they were protected. They got back from the meetings, got back to the United States, and we started noticing unusual activity coming from these systems. We actually spotted over 15 new IOCs that we have never ever seen before, indicators of compromise, and they were basically exfiltrating information, sending them out of the network, and basically compromising the entire network from those 10 systems. Now let's dissect this down. First, try this experiment. Go back to your room tonight and lock a pen in the hotel safe in your room. Call up the front desk and say, you just locked your wallet in the safe. Can somebody open it for you? And start your watch. It will take about 5 minutes for somebody to show up to your room. It will take 3 minutes for them to verify that you are who you say you are, and it will take them 45 seconds to open that safe. If you believe for a second that hotels cannot open the safes in your hotel room, you are deceiving yourself. They absolutely can. In foreign countries, who owns the hotels? The government. Connect the dots. So hotel safes are not very safe. Also, all the endpoint security, all the software on the planet is ineffective against hardware implants. Basically, the name of the game with computers, whoever loads first wins. So basically, after examining these laptops, they basically opened them up and they replaced the BIOS with infected BIOS. So basically, when they started up the computers, the malware was running before the bootloader even started and before we even jumped to the MBR. I'll tell you right now, all the security in the world is not going to help you there. But Eric, isn't that hard to do? If you know what you're doing and you know the laptops, between a minute and a half to 2 minutes, you can open up the system, pop it in, pop it out, shut it down, and get it set up pretty quickly. So under 5 minutes, you can set that up. Which basically means what? If you are traveling overseas, or your executives are traveling overseas, and they're in any possible country in which they can be targeted, which is anywhere, you need to go in and do throwaway laptops. Literally a throwaway laptop. So if you're saying buy a brand new laptop, give it to them, put the minimal apps that are needed, and when you come back in the States, destroy it. You got it. If you look at the price, it actually makes sense. How much is a new laptop today? Let's go high-end, 500 bucks. You can get a pretty good, pretty decent, pretty basic laptop for $500. Question, how long does it take a security professional to verify and validate a laptop that was in a foreign country? Let's be generous. Let's use a reduced rate of $300 an hour, and let's go really, really easy on 10 hours. So minimal is $3,000. So what you want to spend, $3,000 or $500? Oh, by the way, my $500 solution is guaranteed, because you're throwing it away, that your current systems aren't infected. The $3,000 analysis isn't guaranteed. It could still be infected, it could still be validated. So I know why it sounds crazy when I say throw away laptops, but it's actually the most cost-effective solution. It gives you the best results, the best guarantee, and it's much cheaper than spending $3,000. And to show you that I'm really trying to give you the best device, I'm a consultant, so I would much rather you give me $3,000 to buy a new laptop. But I'm just being honest with you, that buying a new laptop is the easier, quicker, more effective method. Next solution. This was over in Europe. We had several executives traveling over to Europe to attend some meetings, and they had smartphones with them. They had some Android devices with them, and they, once again, the security team verified, locked down, and secured them before they left. Came back into the States. Once again, they had monitoring software that was able to capture all their passwords, gain access to all of their email, and basically capture all of the data on their system. Now, once again, let me help you out. When you take a cell phone overseas and you have to register it with the cell towers so you can make calls internationally, do you realize you basically give up control of that device? In order for that cell phone tower to register you and verify and charge you, they have to pull out all the details, all the info, all the billing codes. They can easily drop software onto that system. It is a trivial thing to do. Who owns the cell towers overseas? The government. So once again, the government can very easily go in and control and take over those devices. So once again, not trying to rain on anyone's parade here. But all of the software-based security on the planet doesn't protect against these threats. Because they can still bypass, get around, and compromise your system. Now, just so we're real careful here, because we are at a dangerous part of the presentation. And the dangerous part of the presentation is, we're all tired, and you might have misheard me. And I've had people walk out of here saying, Eric said that endpoint software security products are useless. I absolutely did not say that. I absolutely recommend them. I use them. It is critical that we have endpoint security and we have software solutions on our system. What I'm saying is, those alone will not protect you. Now trust me, things would be a lot worse if we didn't have those in play, but those alone are not going to keep us secure. One of the things that always frustrates me with security folks is sometimes we miss the big picture. I can't tell you how many times I see articles. AV, antivirus is the one that always gets beat up. I want to know who AV pissed off, because that is the one that everyone targets, but it can be any piece. But you hear articles, AV is ineffective at catching advanced threats. Therefore, antivirus is dead. Whoa, 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 whoa. I agree with you. Most security software, like antivirus, is not effective at catching APTs. But how do we get from that to AV is dead? The only possible way we could have got there is if you're telling me that APTs are the only threats. If that is the only threat that's in existence today, then if a piece of software can't protect against it, then it's dead. Is that the only threat out there today? No. Viruses, worms, traditional threats are alive and well. So we need to make sure that we don't get target fixation and so focused on the advanced threat that we go in and crash the security plane. We have to recognize there's other threats out there. A friend of mine wrote one of those articles. AV is ineffective against APT, therefore it's dead. I called them up and I said, be honest with me. I know your company makes you run AV software on your system. Run a report for me. For the last 3 months, how many pieces of malware did your endpoint security catch? He says 350 pieces of malware. That doesn't sound dead to me. That sounds alive, and my question to him was, if AV is dead and you remove it off the system, what's going to catch those 350 pieces? So the problem we have is, if we're not careful, we can go in and be so focused on protecting and securing against advanced threats that we inadvertently create a virus and worm epidemic, because now we get rid of the basic components that stop them, and they now cause major infection. So what I'm saying is, we need to augment those solutions, not replace and take them off the network. Those solutions alone are not going to protect against threats, but they are absolutely needed to keep our environment secure. Now, just in case you want to do a little geeking out with me tonight, I had to throw in one pretty advanced attack vector. How many people remember good old EMI and Tempest-based computers? Many of us do. I know some of you must be tired, just don't get mad at me, but I'm not the oldest person in the room, right? So I know some of you are still back. One of the guys in the back just jumped up. So one of the things that you did is, you remember back in the 80s and 90s, when we had those big computer monitors with the gigantic hoods, you can actually use specialized equipment and pick up the electromagnetic emanations off that system, and you can actually display everything on the computer. So computers gave away emanations that could be picked up by several hundred feet and determine what somebody's typing on their system. Do you realize that cell phones have RF noise that is very similar to emanations that are given off when you're doing calculations? Now you have to be closer. You typically have to be around 10 to 15 feet, not 500. But if you are close enough, you can actually pick up the emanations to actually pull off the cryptographic keys that are used to encrypt the data on the system. Now I'll tell you where I've seen this used. This is typically used at international airports when you have to make connecting flights. Just a few weeks ago, I was over in Singapore teaching, and you can't fly directly from Singapore back to the United States. You typically go through either Japan, China, or South Korea. So typically when you get off the plane, you have to re-clear security. They make you re-clear and go through. So if you're one of the people that they are targeting, which is normally an executive of a company, they're going to go in, and when you put your cell phone laptops on the bin to go through, and you go through the x-ray machine, they're typically going to have some distraction. They're going to either pull you aside, or somebody is going to jump in front of you, and you're going to be delayed, and they're going to go in and do what I call the full body massage, which, right, it's always nice when you go internationally, you got to get that full body pot down, and they do that, and as you're doing that, you don't realize it, they took your phone in the back and imaged it. You can image some of these phones pretty darn quickly. Then, they now have an image of your encrypted hard drive. You go through security. They then say, can you please turn on your phone? Because that's pretty traditional. You turn it on, you unlock your phone, and when you're doing that, you are decrypting your hard drive, generating the cryptographic keys, and under the table, they have a device that's reading the RF noise, and they are actually picking up your cryptographic keys. Now, you leave, they have an encrypted image, they have your crypto keys, they put them together, and then they can access all the data on your smartphone. Now, I'll be honest with you. When I first heard about this, I pulled the BS card. I'm like, no freaking way. This is like James Bond meets James Bond, right? No way possible. I've seen it, it works. So this is more of an advanced nature of adversary, but once again, still targeting individuals, still going after their systems. Now, the question I have is, the biggest motivator for pain, the biggest motivator for change is pain. Have we had enough pain? Have companies had enough pain and frustration that they're going to want to change how they do security? I think yes. Here's why. To me, one of the best things that happened to security people is when Target fired their CEO for having a security breach. Why? Because as soon as that occurred, we now are on every CEO's mind when they go to bed at night. Because basically what that was the shot heard around the cyber world. Because that basically said, every CEO out there, be warned, board of directors are now going to hold you accountable for security, and if you are not addressing security correctly, we will fire you and find somebody else who will.